This is Software Meets Business, a podcast sponsored by Head Channel.
So welcome to another episode of Software Meets Business. And today I have got with me Isabel Acland, and she is the Chief Marketing Officer at Powermeals. Hello and welcome, Isabel.
Hi, nice to be here.
It's great to have you with us. So I wanted to get you on the podcast because obviously you've had some incredibly interesting experience working with and managing software teams. I think it's fair to say that you would say that you don't have a technical background.
No, I don't. So I'm a marketer by training, but a marketer that has often been very dependent on tech. And I've had, my kind of unique bit of experience is managing tech teams when the only tech I've ever done is a tiny bit of MATLAB back in my degree that I've very much forgotten. So,
well, that definitely counts. Programming's programming. Well, look, let's just go back then, because you started out working with software teams probably, was it Brainlabs you started working with software? Was that the first sort of experience?
Yeah, so Brainlabs, which is a marketing agency, I joined when it was very small, when there were only about 20 people. But the unique thing about the agency was that around a quarter of those people were tech. And one of our real selling points was that we used tech to automate and speed up parts of the marketing job. That was really my first interaction point with the tech teams.
How did that go?
So it was interesting. It was because it was when I joined, it was a very small company. It's now a sort of massive media agency. And my job there was to do the keyword bidding on Google Ads. So back then, what's now mostly AI automation used to be people sitting behind their desks and saying, okay, I'm going to bid on the term red trainers for Nike shoes, but it wouldn't just be red trainers. You'd be bidding on thousands and thousands of keywords and changing those bids to try and kind of make sure you're ranking well for the right things and optimizing the cost. That means you're processing large amounts of data, and there's a lot of opportunities to automate parts of it. And Google lets you use scripts within their accounts to speed up various things. Like if you want to A/B test something and turn something on and off every hour, you can write a script for that. So at Brainlabs, we initially had a system where if you had a big job that you didn't really fancy crunching and doing manually, you would go and find a tech person. Mm-hmm. And you would really just try and persuade them that your job was worth spending some time on. And it was very much that sort of system. I mean, tech was roughly assigned by client, but then what those developers did was very ground up, request based, which worked really well because it meant that they were actually developing tools that we needed. And then down the road, when they got a bit larger, a bit more professionalized, they started turning those tools into real sellable products. But in the early days, it was really a bit of a social battle to get the tech resource.
So you had to bribe them with kind of biscuits or?
Oh, it wasn't, never got as far as bribery. Okay. It was very much,
that's good news.
You had to be able to sell that your idea was a good one and interesting and would make a difference. And you're going to save me so much time. And ultimately, make a big difference for the clients we were working with. And
so when you were at that time, were those in-house tech people or were they external?
Yeah, fully in-house, which was great because that is, that system wouldn't work with external people. You can't turn up at someone's desk if they're quite as easily if they're not in the same room as you. And then that was really my first interaction with tech teams, being a junior trying to haggle for a bit of resource. And that turned into quite an interesting system where we had to effectively to convert from that obviously not very sustainable social request system. We switched to something where there was actually a voting system. So every sprint, the tech team would say, these are the requests we've had. Many of these tools are applicable to multiple clients. Let's get the account teams, the people dealing with our clients and who ultimately will be using this tech, to vote on which projects they want most, and would all vote, and then whatever got the most votes would go into production.
That's good.
Yeah, which was a really nice way of getting that, keeping the development useful and up to speed, and keeping our marketing teams engaged with what was going on as well.
Did you get into the idea of having weighting on the vote? So if a client was big, they had more votes.
Yeah, we did actually. So V1 was just per person votes, but then it turned into a point system. So every manager had a set number of points depending on how many clients, what their client billings were effectively. And we would assign those points next to the projects we wanted to get done, and bigger projects cost more points. So that was a really good way of kind of understanding from our side how to prioritize how long things took. And actually then the tech team themselves kept half the points, because they also by that point had a kind of strategic leader who could also say, these are the projects that have the most sellability, the most market kind of.
Yeah, but I think that's a really important. I think a lot of people who work with tech teams don't realize you can only get so much through, and they end up saying they want everything all at once. That's a classic kind of pattern that you see. But having that point system kind of changed it to made it focused on the commercial aspects that the business is a commercial entity. So by prioritizing things that clients wanted, I guess that probably worked quite well, didn't it? I mean, did it? Yeah. Carry on for as long as you remember, or you were there.
Yeah, that was the final version that I saw. I don't know how they're doing things now, but that was working. It did work really well. The challenge was always being able to deliver to a date, and that's always, I guess, often a challenge with tech development. Is you need to be able to tell your client that something will be done to a certain real life time frame. And it's always, you don't quite know how long a project is going to be. So getting that balance between prioritizing the things that would have the most impact, but also, sometimes we just had to override the system because there's a deadline. This has to be by Black Friday. This has to be by XYZ. So that was the downside of the system, was it wasn't a static roadmap.
Yeah. So that was kind of your experience at Brainlabs, and then you switched up and you got a bit more involved when you went to Switchcraft.
Yep. So Switchcraft is an energy switching fintech, and again, very lucky to have in-house developers. So it was a small team, but one of the founders was technical, and he had hired, been able to leverage his network and hire some really good techies into the team. So even though we were a team of, I think, between 6 and 10 at various points, but the tech brain power in the company was certainly higher than that would suggest. And there, we worked more to a roadmap, to a more traditional, this is what we want to get done by when. and we very much defined that roadmap together. So again, my role is always on the marketing side, but I was more involved there in terms of converting writing the specs, I guess, in terms of what we needed to deliver to give clients for our energy switching service.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what happened? Was it a sort of similar process there? Did you have a voting mechanism, or was it?
No, not at all. It was much more because the developers having a founder developer is a nice useful setup. So he was able to bridge some of the gap between these are the commercial needs and these are the technical realities. And then it was really, we sat down, had meetings, agreed on the roadmap, and then worked towards that, which is the complete different end of the spectrum, right? So it wasn't a kind of voting dynamic system. It was here's the plan, we'll deliver to it. If there's a delay, you'll be notified, but it's basically rolling the tech out to a plan. Yeah.
And I mean, looking back at both of those, different experiences, was there anything that kind of stood out to you that you remember taking forward into the, the next part of your career?
That's a very good question. Certainly learned a lot in terms of the processes required to actually scope a task. Because fundamentally, all you're trying to do is prioritize, get that balance right between business impact and cost. But because so often these teams are completely separate, understanding the true cost and understanding the true business impact and tying the two together is not super straightforward. And I think those two approaches were both had pros and cons. They were both very interesting in terms of different ends of the spectrum for coming at that same problem.
Yeah, I think it's that thing of it's difficult to balance the positive and negatives of the different approaches, but you're always kind of trying to get to that point where there's no negatives. But is that really achievable? Well, I don't know. Maybe it is, because you ended up going to Powermeals, right?
Yeah.
What was that? What took you there?
So my current role at Powermeals, I actually moved to Powermeals because of relocating to Switzerland. We were in London during lockdown, and I don't know where you got stuck, but London was not a fun place to be when you couldn't go outside and everything was shut. So we, towards the end of the pandemic, when you could travel, moved out to Switzerland. And that's when Powermeals comes into the picture. Powermeals is a meal delivery startup. So what we're specialized in is cooking and creating tasty ready meals that we then deliver across Switzerland. And the challenge there is, if you've got this startup where there's no particular there's not a technical person in the team.
So there was no. So when you joined Powermeals, there was no CTO or
no CTO,
no technical leader.
Let me just interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I just wanted to let you know about our wonderful sponsor, Headchannel. Headchannel builds software engineering teams, and they've been building software for clients since 2003. They have a very simple engagement model. Either they develop and run it, or they build it and you run it. They could also help with finding a fractional CTO if you need that support. You can find them at headchannel.co.uk. And now back to the podcast.
No one, and still today, we don't have anyone in-house who does development. It's very much, we are a food company, and that's what we're focused on. But at the same time, what we're doing is not something that you can plug and play out of a box with existing systems. So the technical parts of our system are things like we recommend meals to people based on the preferences they tell us, what allergens they have, and they can set up their schedule, and it all gets kind of automatically processed through payments, and they have a little account where they can manage their upcoming orders and change. This week I want 5 meals, next week I want 7, and set all of that up in their account, which is not an amazingly difficult technical challenge, but it's not. You can't use Spotify for Spotify. You can't use Shopify for that. So you do have to do some customization. And when I first joined Powermeals, they were so they just started working with a very good Polish agency. Before that, they were working with a not very good Indian agency, and they'd made the switch because they had a 5-day outage on their systems.
5 days?
I mean, this was when the company was, it was 6 months old, but still having your website offline for 5 days when you're trying to get things up and going is not a situation you want to be dealing with.
No.
So they'd made the decision to kind of, instead of trying to focus on costs in that area, to really go with a proper professional agency that knew what they were doing. And that was great in some ways. We had a team of sort of 4 people through the agency, 1 person to coordinate and communicate, 1 person to QA check and make sure there were no bugs anywhere in the system, and then 2 people actually developing and building our subscription accounts and pages and website and all of that.
So how did you come up with that team structure? Was that kind of decided before you got there, or were you part of that kind of coming up with the structure of the team?
It was. I was involved in the team. It was mainly to meet our needs. I mean, the communication person was very useful at a point where, I was the most technical person for them to talk to on our side. So they really helped to bridge that gap and explain, translate from developer speak to, more digital speak. And so that was very useful. And then the QA checker was also useful because I guess, it just meant that there really were few bugs, and the ones that were there were getting found and dealt with. But ultimately, we decided it was overkill for what we needed, because a company where the agency could have handled something much, much more technical than what we were demanding of them, and that setup was great, but it was also came with a price tag of having a team of 4 people, and you're paying for the benefit of that translation piece. You're paying for someone to manage the priorities for you and translate between you and the team and manage the sprints. And, we had a nice Jira board that showed how everything was progressing. But ultimately it was quite a lot for.
Yeah, I mean, it's that thing, isn't it? There's different ways of engaging. There's the old classic fixed price model. So, you come up with a bunch of requirements, you give it to the agency, the software house then builds that out and then hands it back, which is the old classic, waterfall kind of style. Then there's the sprint-based, iteration-based, where you hire a team and they basically work on it. But you have to pay for that team and set and kind of guarantee that they're going to be around for the whole length of what you need. So and I suppose that's the way that you'd gone down. It wasn't a fixed price project. It was you were hiring a team from an agency.
Yeah. So we had a fixed amount of resource rather than a fixed project cost. And that was useful for us because there were, we were still developing the product and there were requests coming through from the customers, and we were changing a bit the priorities compared to what we would have written as a scope if we'd done it upfront.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of doing it that way. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think very much in that kind of old school kind of, well, we want this, you go off and do it and deliver it back. But by the time they get it back, things have changed and then they need to change things. So it's much better to do that in an iterative way.
Yeah. I mean, I think
but that has a cost, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does have a cost. And I think one of the things that it's the benefit of having to define everything precisely up front and to buy a product is that you do that scoping really well and really clearly and really carefully. And there's always a risk when you're doing things more, okay, we've got this much resource, okay, what do we want them to do this week? That actually you don't do the scoping quite as well. Mm-hmm. And the scoping is still super important to actually figure out how exactly will even simple things like redoing our homepage and we've got a scrolling banner, and for us it's okay, make a scrolling banner, but then for the tech team it's like, okay, how fast is that going to scroll? What kind of
which direction is it scrolling?
Left or right? And having the discipline to do that scoping is you've got to maintain it and you've got to keep up with the pace of the development.
Yeah. So I guess you felt, or some of this certainly reminds me of your story about when you were at Brainlabs and you had, the backlog and you were choosing things out of the backlog. So this you must have kind of got into that in the same way. But maybe the agency was driving that though this time.
Yeah, the agency were helping in that they would do the step of, here's what you want. Okay, we have some questions on these bits. Okay, now we've clarified. Here's how long that would take. And then we would go and like, okay, well, that's quite long actually. So maybe we do this other task that we think is a bit lower impact, but it's going to be more immediate. So yeah, that worked well. But then...
And then, you took on the role of a para CTO, as it were.
Yes.
How did that work?
Well, as much as we had one internally. So certainly my role in this was to direct the agency and tell them what the priorities ultimately were, which is quite, there are benefits to someone from the commercial team doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it does mean, I'm talking to the developers, but I'm also talking to the customers every week. So
yeah,
I do know where their real requests are and what they're after.
Yeah. So that's a good thing. I mean, obviously it takes time out of your day, but having someone close to the customer who's driving the features of the product is absolutely, worthwhile. And we still see sometimes it happens that people do forget about the customer, the person who's really going to benefit from what you're building. It's amazing how much that still happens. So that was really, really good. And then, but obviously you're being the CMO, you were focusing on the goals of the business as well. So juggling those two things. But at some point, from what you were saying earlier, it got too expensive.
Yeah, fundamentally, yeah. Ultimately we decided that we would try and move away from an agency and work with contractors directly, which is a fairly bold decision when you don't have technical knowledge in-house. But for us was the correct decision because that whole professional agency setup was great, but it was a lot. And even just, you have a weekly call with those 4 agency team members and that's 4 hours of development time that you've already spent. So where we are now, we work with 2 contractors who I manage directly, and we're still working on we buy their hours rather than buying them for a project. So they give us 2 days a week each, and we just prioritize. I prioritize, and we go for it.
Yeah, I expect, because you've had that experience, and I don't just mean MATLAB, but that was probably experience because it's programming, and you probably get an understanding of versioning and how things can easily go wrong. But because you've had the other experience as well, you're able to then take on the freelancers. I like to think about it. We've all seen those house building programs where people come in and go, "Oh yeah, I'm going to manage the whole thing myself," and someone says to them, "Have you got any experience managing a building project?" They go, "No idea." It's that thing. You can either get a builder, which is a kind of like the agency model, where you've got someone managing the team and the trades, or you can go and you can hire the trades directly, but you've got to manage the resourcing of, getting the materials on site, all of that stuff. And essentially that's what you're doing with the freelancers.
Yeah.
There's no materials on site, but I'm sure they probably said, well, I need a license for this because I need to do this. And then you've got to manage the licenses and, but because you've had that other experience through your career, I think, it's ideal for you to do it that way.
Yeah, I think it's been a good move. I mean, we did, one of the most challenging parts was finding good freelancers, because it's very hard to interview a developer when you can't really test their skills.
So how did you do that? Did you hire anyone in to help you with that, or did you just do it?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. So we asked a friend who we could book for a day to come and then give us some help and some feedback and review a number of profiles and actually check their code rather than just their, we did all the interviews on a kind of culture fit, and do you have the right time that we're looking for, and are you going to be responsive, and those kinds of things. But then, yeah, ultimately we needed to pay someone else to help us with that hiring process.
Yeah, and I think that's the right decision, because I think developers it's very easy. Some developers interview very, very well and then perhaps don't really deliver. And it's actually getting harder. The stories that we have now of, it's obvious that people are using AI in interviews. Even for, live coding exercises, they'll have another screen or a part of the screen, and it's getting very hard to find people who are actually honest about their skills and can demonstrate honestly their skills.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think overall, if you were kind of to think back and think about everything that you've done with managing and working with software teams, what are the big kind of lessons that you might have that you've really learned?
Big learnings, put in the time up front, try and think about everything, because even if you think you've thought about everything, you definitely won't have thought about everything. So if you don't even try to think about everything, you'll be a very long way off in terms of understanding the real needs and the details and how exactly does this button function and that kind of thing. So I think try and think about everything, because the worst case scenario is that developers do a bunch of work that has to be thrown out because it's not in line with what you actually meant. So that would be kind of number one tip. I think having flexibility is very valuable. Having the ability to change the priorities, not all the time, but things come up, and you might, especially in smaller companies, you might think that one feature is super important, but then you see an even bigger opportunity, and having the flexibility to go for that can be really game changing in terms of results. And I mean, one of the things that we're extremely lucky with is the developers that we're working with are, they're very responsive. They believe in the mission of the company. They're not just sitting and doing code, but they're also engaging and they're interested in what we're doing. So I think spending a bit of time, it can feel like you're wasting time and wasting money when you chat to developers about, this is our new menu or whatever it might be, but actually investing in the engagement of your tech team and bringing them that bit closer to your way of thinking is also really, I think, valuable.
And that so ties back to what you said almost right at the start, where you had to go around and convince developers to get excited about what you were trying to do. The same thing holds true now. The same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people need motivation always. And there's nothing worse than working on a task that you think is pointless. So giving them that feedback that, okay, last month you released this new upsell part of the checkout, and actually that's driven a 5% growth in revenue, and developers often don't get that results back, which is having.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very important. So, well, just to wrap up, what's next for Powermeals?
Well, we are continuing to capture the Swiss meal delivery market. We're happy with our tech setup at the moment, so I think we'll keep going, and there's always new projects and new things rolling out. So yeah, more of the same, onwards and upwards, really.
That's great. Well, Isabel, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and talk through your journey of working with software teams. I think it's one of those things where in business we kind of take software for granted because there's so much of it around us all the time. But actually having a team build something that's really specific for your business and to have that relationship with them to get the best out of those people, it's just, everything you've talked about is a demonstration of that. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been great to talk about it. Not the most traditional approach to tech, but I hope there's some insights that people can take away.
There absolutely are. Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Software Meets Business, the podcast sponsored by Head Channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your preferred platform.